Bible Worm, reading the Bible with Bible Worm.
Welcome to Bible Worm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, professor of religious studies at Hendrix College and theologian in residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas.
And I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning and Music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish, one Christian.
This week, we're reading the Pentecost text in Acts 2, 1-4, and then Galatians 4, 1-7, and 5, 13-26. We talk about the experience of the Holy Spirit, who transitions us from disciples to apostles sent into the world to show the way to others. We wrestle again with the relationship of faith and Torah, and to what extent the faithful need guidelines to show us the right way to live. And we ponder the fruits of the Spirit, wondering how we measure up and whether we can see the Spirit at work today in unexpected places. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Amy, it's time for Bible Worm.
Bobby, it's our last regular episode of the year.
It is. That's crazy that it's been a year, and also that it's only been a year.
Yeah, time is funny like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's our last episode of the year, and even though we're in this 4-year rotating cycle, the last episode always perches us. We're perched. We are
we're
perched
little birds
upon, little
I like
birds.
that. Like we're little birds, and the narrative lectionary sets us upon
different texts, and it always sets us upon.
We alight at the end of the year.
2. We alight upon.
Upon Acts 2.
That's a nice verb.
Oh, that's a light. That's beautiful.
A light like a flame.
Which is also, I see what you did there.
Look at
I see what you did there. Well, Amy, as you are very subtly pointing us to, today we are in, it's the day of Pentecost in the liturgical calendar of both your tradition, in which it is Shavuot, and my tradition, in which it is Pentecost, which is just like Greek-speaking Jews in the time of the New Testament called Shavuot.
Yeah.
Then Christians sort of ran with that word, and the Jewish community claimed the Hebrew word, and now they've gone all sorts of different ways. But anyway, so our text today, it's a conglomeration of not easy texts, just to be perfectly honest. We're starting in Acts 2, 1-4, which is the quintessential classical Pentecost text. And then moving on to Galatians 4, 1-7, and 5. We're going to do 13-26. The narrative lectionary has 16-26, but I don't know.
It's just a minor addition.
It's just a few extra
small
verses. Yeah, in the narrative lectionary, those verses are also in a parenthetical, meaning they're optional. So not only are we taking the option, as we always do, but we're going to actually expand the options slightly, which is kind of, what you would expect
on
from us.
brand. Yeah.
So I'm going to start us out then in Acts chapter 2, and I am reading in the Common English Bible. When Pentecost day arrived, they, that is the disciples, were all together in one place. Suddenly a sound from heaven like the howling of a fierce wind filled the entire house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be individual flames of fire alighting, perching, like it's perching. That's where that came from. Is that what you were talking about this whole time?
Not consciously.
Oh yeah, but it was lovely. It alighted on them. It perched upon their shoulders. On each one of them. They were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit enabled them to speak. This is a really lovely text, and it goes on to do lots of really interesting things, which we're not going to talk about this year, but we do talk about them in other years. But we do have these 4 verses that describe the arrival of the Holy Spirit upon the disciples. This is said to happen on Pentecost, which, as we were talking, is the Jewish celebration of Shavuot. Can you just get us up to speed on what we need to know about what Shavuot/Pentecost is in the Jewish tradition?
Yeah. Shavuot, all three of our pilgrimage holidays have these sort of different layers that they're working on the same time, at the same time. So they are a harvest. There is a harvest component to Shavuot, but that's not what I want to talk about today. It is a commemoration of the day of Revelation, the day that the Jews received the Torah at Sinai, that Moses received Torah at Sinai. And one thing that's feeling important about it for me this go around, this year, is this imperative we have in the Jewish tradition to count the days between Passover and Shavuot, like literally count them. Like you say a blessing and then you count the days. And I learned this teaching that has really stuck with me and really sort of enlivened my reading of those couple verses you just read this year, which is that at Passover on the Jewish calendar, you could think of it as being related to the death of Jesus also in the Christian community. There's this like tremendous salvific gift that is just given. It is not earned, like you are redeemed because you are in this grand gift from God. And then there is this quiet period where you have to figure out, what do you do in the days after some big, holy, miraculous epiphany? And how do you actually work that into your life and into yourself and, pull in that closeness to God instead of letting it be sort of a standalone thing? And so what I love so much about this scene in this text, Bobby, is like, they've been waiting since Jesus died and was resurrected. They've just been like really faithfully waiting and praying and waiting for the next thing. And that there's so much energy in that for me. So then, yes, it is the day that Torah is given, but having Torah given like on top of that energy that's built up after the waiting feels really, really big. It feels really big to me.
Yeah, I love that, Amy. So we've got the huge event of the Exodus itself on the one end, and then the huge event of the giving of the Torah on the other end. And in between, there's that period of waiting. The waiting is both like sort of processing the thing that has happened and also anticipating the thing that is yet still to happen.
Yeah. And it's something that, what do we do ourselves during that time? Like, how do we show that we want it and we're engaged instead of just being like, wow, good show, God.
Yeah. In the Christian tradition, of course, we would transpose that onto the resurrection of Jesus on the front end, and this story, the giving of the Spirit, on the other end. And then here we are in the middle, counting the days and reflecting on and preparing for. How many days do you count in the Omer?
It is 7 weeks, so 49 days, and then the 50th day would be Shavuot or Pentecost. So that's how you get Penta.
Yeah, the 50th day. So we are 50. So if we're trying to like place ourselves, like, first of all, that's what the word means. Yeah. And then second of all, if we're trying to resituate ourselves in the story that we had been reading, sort of starting with Luke and then into the beginning of Acts, we are now 50 days from the Passover that Jesus celebrated with his disciples at the Last Supper. So we're roughly 7 weeks after that Passover. If you were the disciples thinking about this period of waiting, like, Jesus had told them specifically to wait, right? Jesus was resurrected from the dead, and he said, wait for the Spirit to come upon you. And then he floated off on a cloud. And then they don't really know when that Spirit's going to come. And so this like kind of intense waiting of expectation, but the not yet of it, like that is very much alive in this text. I appreciate your calling our attention to that.
Yeah. It's there's so much energy in this moment.
So that energy then is like when it culminates in this description of like, they're just together. Like, what do they do when they're together? I'm assuming that they're praying and doing those sorts of things, but they have gathered as their community. And while they are together, the text tells us suddenly that the room is just full of howling wind and just like this raging wind and these little individual flames of fire, perching on their shoulders. So this is the image of the Spirit like arriving in the room, I guess. What does that kind of imagery evoke for you?
What a good question. I mean, I think that this strong wind sort of blowing through the place it makes me think of the wind that was originally sort of at creation, at the moment of creation, that I associate it with God's presence. I associate with God's presence. Do you have a different association with the wind?
I really like that resonance, Amy, the sort of like the primordial moment of creation. Because that really is, in a sense, what Shavuot is and what Pentecost is. Like the giving of the Torah, like, creates the people of Israel in a different way than they had been. Like, previously they were children of Abraham, like descendants of Abraham. When they received the Torah, this is like a moment of creation, right? Do you think of it that way? Like, the people of Israel has now been created newly?
No, gosh, I've never thought about that question before. It certainly is like a new beginning.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about it directly related to creation.
I probably wouldn't have used the word creation.
Except that we're in the middle of this conversation.
Except the rushing wind sort of evokes that Genesis 1 and then that.
Yeah.
In the Christian tradition, this is also a new creation, right? I mean, there's things that go before, and so it's not creation out of nothing.
Yeah.
But it is like the Christian community in this moment is being created in a different way as a community of the Spirit, that, Jesus is no longer bodily present. And so you've got the Spirit forming the community in a new way. In my head, it sort of feels like as the Torah created Israel in a new way, here the Spirit is creating the Christian body in a new way.
Yeah, it felt striking to me reading this that the last time not the last time, but in Genesis, when we read about this sort of Ruach Elohim, there's no one there to hear it. And so to have like the sound was like a violent wind, it just, I don't know, underscores for me that like there is that connection. And also it's a really different place to start creation from.
Yeah. The other thing that appears here besides the howling wind, there's these little, my translation, the CEB, has individual flames of fire. NRSV has like tongues of flame or something.
Yeah, I like yours better. Mine has divided tongues as of fire. And I feel like every year you explain to me what that means, and every year I picture like a tongue on someone's shoulder. And like gross. I know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if we think of it as individual flames of fire lighting on each one of them, so they each have like they all of them have fire, but each of them have their own manifestation of that fire. That's
yes.
That seems important. Does the flaminess like do you know what I mean? Like the fact that it's fire and not something else. Does that mean anything to you?
The image that just came to me was when the Israelites were in the desert, and at night they were led by a flame of fire. And in the daytime by, a cloud. Or like that's sort of, the thing that indicated God's presence. But how interesting then to think before that there was like one pillar of fire that was leading all the people, and now to have individual ones on people's shoulders. I don't know if that's the right image to go with, because that's not exactly what's happening here, but
I mean, I like that if you want to play with that image a little bit, because, Jesus has sort of said to them earlier in Acts, like, wait for the Holy Spirit, and then the Holy Spirit is going to make you be my witnesses in the world. And so there is a sense in which if the flame is representative of the Spirit in some way, then it is like showing them the way in the wilderness. Like, here's what you need to do.
And they are precisely not going to stay all together. They're going to go off into different corners of the world. So,
and then they themselves, like bearing that flame, they are also sort of beacons or guides on the path for other people who would see them and like follow them. Like, so the Spirit is not like centrally located for all the nations to follow, but the Spirit is located amongst the followers. It's the same Spirit.
Yeah.
But the followers are the bearers of it into the world. That's
a lot of responsibility.
That's a lot of responsibility. Yeah, Acts is not shy. Acts is not shy about that. Like, y'all are going to be my witnesses in Judea and Samaria. Oh, yeah, all right. Or in Jerusalem, it starts out. Okay, yeah, all right. Judea and Samaria, to the ends of the earth. You're like, oh, that's pretty big. Yeah.
That's funny.
But here it just starts out in one room, and you have the sense of something big is coming.
Yeah.
The gift that they are given in this moment, or what they are empowered to do, is to speak in other languages as the Spirit enabled them to speak. This is sometimes understood as speaking in tongues, like Paul talks about glossolalia, the tongues of angels. But that is not what actually appears to be happening here. It seems to be literally they are able to speak languages that they don't know how to speak.
Yeah.
And so that's the gift. There's a lot that we could do with it if we read further on in this text and we see how it functions. But do you have any thoughts about the initial gift of the Spirit seeming to be about speaking languages?
I mean, that seems to just go hand in hand with the charge that you were describing for them. Like, if they're really going to go out into the world and offer testimony, they're going to need to be able to talk to people.
And to talk to them on their terms.
Right.
That seems important to me. Like, not that I'm not going to teach you to speak English and then I'm going to talk to you in English. It's that I'm going to learn how to speak in your language, and then I'm gonna. Here they're not learning; they're just able to do it.
They just can do it. It's like
which would be so cool. That's probably AI is going to get us there pretty soon. But I just turned the Spirit into AI, and I feel bad about that.
Yeah. Oh well.
Amy, this little part of this text, I think, is to set the stage for us. Like this, we're on Pentecost. Like, let's get in a Pentecost frame of mind, and then Paul's going to talk to us in Galatians about some other ways of thinking about the Spirit. But before we make that move, are there things about Pentecost or this initial gift of the Spirit you want to draw our attention to?
I just want to say one patently obvious thing that seems striking to me this year. Jesus isn't here.
Yeah.
Like, they had this, their whole experience, I shouldn't say their whole experience, because these people, grew up as Jews, and so they had a relationship with God already, but they've been in this intense Jesus experience. They are followers of Jesus. They know Jesus was resurrected, and then they have this other really intense experience that Jesus is not at least visibly present for. And it just seems like an important moment to really sort of on a soul level sort of integrate that these things are all of a piece in some way. That maybe that was, if it was understood intellectually before, now they maybe would be tied at a different level.
That's really important, Amy. And it's a little bit what I was trying to say earlier about, we're at an inflection point in the early church. And, this is the moment at which, if you want to think of the disciple, the word disciple as follower, and the word apostle as one who is sent. In some very real way, this is the transition from disciple to apostle.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And so now you've got the responsibility. And then so for those of us who are Christian, this is presumably also on us now, that we not just that we get to look and see how it's done and be like, oh yeah, that's nice. Yeah. But in this really kind of big unknown, the disciples don't know how to be apostles. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They've kind of been trained, but now they've got the Spirit, and then it's just off you go. And so oftentimes, I'm somebody, you're an Enneagram 5, right? I have that wing too. So I like to know what I'm doing before I have to go do it. And this text is a little bit no, Jesus is gone. The Spirit's here. Just do the next thing. And
that's right.
And we'll see where it goes. Yeah.
That's right. Do the next thing.
Hi, I'm Terry Peterson, minister of St. John's Church of Scotland in Gourock, west of Glasgow on the Scottish coast. And I am the liturgy writer for Bible Worm, which means I get to spend a lot of time listening to Bobby and Amy, and that is a great joy. It is fascinating to hear them read and talk through stories I thought I knew pretty well, since I'm starting my third time through the narrative lectionary now. I always come away with more ideas than I can fit into a liturgy or a sermon, And working with them has deepened my own spiritual life as I write liturgy that follows the contours of their conversations. I appreciate that they don't shy away from the difficult parts, and that they always find connections between these ancient texts and our contemporary life. And it's fun for me to work those connections into liturgy that empowers worshiping communities to speak to and about God in new ways. If you join the Bible Worm Patreon at the Liturgy Worm level or higher, you'll have access to those liturgies and prayers that you can use or adapt, as well as early access to the podcast. Or there are other levels with different benefits, including Bible studies, access to the Bible Worm Collaborative discussion group, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast to help Bobby and Amy continue creating this incredible resource for people of faith around the world. And now back to this week's podcast.
All right, Amy, well, let us move over to Paul in Galatians.
Okay. What you got for us today, Galatians?
We're picking up in chapter 4, verse 1, which is right where we were at the end of last week. Paul has just said the thing about no longer Jew or Greek, slave or free, male and female. And if you belong to Christ, you are Abraham's descendants and heirs according to the promise. Mm-hmm. And then this week's text picks up in the very next verse in 4:1. I'm saying that as long as the heirs are minors, they are no different from slaves, though they really are the owners of everything. However, they are placed under trustees and guardians until the date set by the parents. In the same way, when we were minors, we were also enslaved by this world's system. But when the fulfillment of the time came, God sent his son, born through a woman and born under the law. This was so he could redeem those under the law, so that we could be adopted. Because you are sons and daughters, God sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Therefore, you are no longer a slave, but a son or daughter. And if you are his child, then you are also an heir through God. It's worth just saying there at the outset that where the word law is used there, the intent of it is Torah. So it's not like the laws of the land, but it's specifically thinking about the law of Moses. Mm-hmm. Amy, he starts out with this idea about inheritance and heirs and minors. Can you help us start thinking about what he's up to there?
Well, I'll tell you what I thought he was up to, but then when I got to the end, things got a little turned around in my head. So starting at the beginning, here's my best understanding, that he is pointing out that when you're a child who is an heir to something, there's potential in the future for an autonomy or power that you will have.
Yes.
But you don't have it yet.
Right.
So at that moment, in that stage, it seems like he's saying it doesn't matter whether you're an heir to something else or you're not an heir to something else. Your everyday life would look pretty much the same.
Yes.
And you need to be under the care of, my translation has guardians and trustees. You need to be under the care of someone else because you are not yet at a point where you can sort of have any say-so in your fate.
Yeah. So in that sense, a slave doesn't have any say-so in their future. Mm-hmm. An heir who's a minor also doesn't have any say-so. And so they might experience the world kind of similarly. Mm-hmm. But the heir knows that's not the permanent state of things, whereas the slave is kind of perpetually in that state.
Yeah, there's this potential, and you're right. Maybe if the heir knows, then there's sort of a hope or you feel like you're preparing for some different stage, whereas if you're enslaved, you're not.
We've seen something similar to this last week when we talked about the pedagogos. The law is like the nanny. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
This is kind of a similar idea, although it pushes it one step farther to talk about like what happens next or something like what happens after the time of the nannyship. This actually seems to be the way that Roman law worked, that you did have, like when you were like, I think it was until you were 14, you had somebody who was like in charge of you. And then from like 14 to 25, if you were a male child, you had somebody who was like your mentor almost, like helping prepare you. And then at 25, you became like a full adult. And so that, I think Paul is using some version of that idea to kind of help us get at this, whatever you're trying to help us get at, which we need to unpack. So what he says is, when we were minors, we were enslaved by this world's system. And that's what the CEB has. What does the NRSV have at the end of 3?
It does not help. The elemental spirits of the world.
Yeah. How did you start to make sense of that?
Well, I made sense of it with the note in my study Bible.
That's the way to do it, yeah.
Which says, polytheistic piety previously observed by the Gentile Galatians. Which was very...
piety. Say that 5 times real fast.
I know. Yeah, right? And then Gentile Galatians. Which is very interesting because then, you already pointed out there are parts of this text that are talking about Torah law.
Yeah.
And then maybe there's this other part that's talking about... Because I think in this section, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he is not speaking to Jewish Christians. He's speaking to Gentile Christians.
Yeah, it's that complicated situation, Amy, where they're Gentile Christians who have been visited by Jewish Christians.
Yes.
Who have told them that they need to be Jewish to be Christian.
And Paul's saying they don't.
And he's saying they don't, yeah.
Right.
But his audience is Gentile Christian.
His audience right now, is Gentile Christian. And so they would have come up in whatever the polytheistic piety of the place was, not in the law of the Torah.
Right, yes. And I like that idea of like the elemental spirits. Like I think that the sort of like pagan way of life is probably a way of getting at it. Some people also read this. Paul elsewhere uses the language of principalities and powers, by which he means something like the spiritual rulers of the earth that are like, it's not exactly Satan, but it's kind of in that ballpark that there are these spirits that have us and possess us and we are enslaved to them. The CEB's world system, I kind of like that because a little more touches the ground a little more for me because then I'm like, I know what that means. Like,
it's more like the powers of the world. Yeah.
This is
that
our
means
politics
something to me
and
now.
our economics and our or just the ways that we operate. And you could put in things like, our racial and ethnic biases and our gender biases and our class biases, all these kinds of things, like the way the world works. So what he's envisioning is, and he uses the word we there, which is interesting, because Paul is not a Gentile Christian. Paul is a Jewish Christian.
Yeah.
But he seems to be identifying with the Gentile Christians to say we, all of us, were enslaved to the world system in some way. Then he goes on to say, when the time of fulfillment came, so this seems to be the moment where we're going from being minors to taking our role as heirs. God sent his son, born through a woman and born under the law, so he could redeem those under the law so that we could be adopted.
I'm so confused.
So a lot happened right there. Yeah. Can you at least talk through your confusion a little bit?
Well, first I have a sort of a question even before we get to verse 4. I'm not sure I understand the relationship of verse 3 to what came before it.
Oh.
While we were minors, we were enslaved. We were just talking about heirs and...
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Like, that a minor is like a slave, whether you're an heir or not. And now he has enslaved minors, and it doesn't say whether they're heirs to anything.
Yeah.
Please help.
The way that I have been reading that is that sort of along the lines of what we read last week about the law being the nanny.
Uh-huh.
I've been reading that sort of similarly, where the world systems are the trustees and guardians.
Okay, so they
And so
had a
they've
nanny.
been-
It was just,
they've
it
been
wasn't
keeping.
Jewish law. It was, okay.
Yeah. So that's exactly the way to say it, Amy. I love that. So last week we were talking about the Jewish pedagogos, which was the Torah. Now we're saying also Gentiles had one of those, and it was these world systems. So we come from different places, but we were all kind of being, I don't know, controlled, guided. There's a positive way and a negative way of looking at it by these other systems, because we were not yet fully adults and we couldn't do our own thing yet. We didn't know what was really real, so we had to follow somebody else.
And should I just not worry too much about the word enslaved in that verse?
Yeah, I go back because, what happens at the end of this text, I think, is that we discover that we've been heirs this whole time. And this idea of enslaved, it has a very negative connotation to it, a thing that controls what you can and cannot do. I think that's an interesting way, though, to think about the world's systems. It's like maybe they seem like they're there for our own good, but really what they're doing is controlling us and making decisions for us. But I see what you're saying about like, okay, that's great, but like, why did my dad hire that guy? If he's, why do my parents hire a guardian who's gonna enslave me? No, you look at me like that is not what you were thinking.
No, I'm trying to figure out if they're heirs or not. But I think I should let you go on, because I think if I hold you at verse 3, I think it's going to make more sense if I just chill out for a minute.
I think I was reading N.T. Wright's commentary, which you might judge me for that, but I like N.T. Wright sometimes. And he was saying this reminds him of like a 19th century novel where people get into some really complicated situation and then there's no way out. And then suddenly they discovered that they had a rich uncle that died that they never heard of, who gave them a great gift. And suddenly everything is solved. He reads this passage that way, which I think is really kind of interesting.
Okay.
And so the situation then would be Gentiles who didn't know that maybe they didn't even know they were enslaved, but they had no idea that they were heirs, or that,
I got it.
And then suddenly Jesus shows up and sets them free from a thing.
Okay, great. No, that was really helpful, because then whether they were heirs or not, it doesn't matter, because your life is the same when you're a minor.
Yeah.
And so they didn't know that they were.
Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe they had not been heirs at that point, but they seem to become heirs with Jesus.
Their rich uncle.
So Jesus, their rich uncle. So Paul is very specific that God's son is born through a woman and under the law, so he could redeem those under the law so that we could be adopted. And so there's something about being born from a Jewish woman that is really important to Paul here, but not in the ways we might have anticipated in Luke's gospel when we had those conversations. Do you have a sense of what Paul cares about here?
So yes, it is clearly important to him that this is happening in the context of Judaism, and that this is, like born of a woman, like it's sort of within the systems of the world to some degree. Like this is an actual body born of an actual woman within Jewish law, all these, sort of pre-existing systems. In order to redeem those who were under the law, so to redeem the people sort of within the group that he was born into. But I lose the thread when it gets to there's like two so that he could redeem those who were under the law, and so that we might receive adoption. And I don't know how those two, like I want to diagram, are those two related to each other, or are they just two?
This is related to your question about, were they heirs or were they not? And so this idea of adoption, I think, may be the key to answering that question, which is they are not naturally heirs, and they are naturally sort of enslaved under this world system. And so the world system has to be disrupted so that they are free of it, so that then they can be adopted. So they become heirs in this text once they have been freed of the systems that are controlling them, because Jesus.
And so the coming of Jesus has sort of like a dual goal. It has the goal of redeeming the people within the covenant that existed, and it also makes possible and has the goal
Yes.
of being able to invite other people not into the covenant, because that's not what Paul wants.
Right.
So inviting other people into what is happening in some way.
Yeah, I mean, the language that he's using is family language, right? They are adopted and they become heirs of the kingdom. And so this is a way of talking about covenant community, but you're right, he's not using that language. He's using the language of like, now you are children of God in a different way, in a set apart kind of way. For me, there's a couple ways of understanding that, like, why did Jesus have to be born through a woman? I mean, there's reason why, like, everybody has to be born through a woman, but why does it matter? And born under the law. And one way of understanding that is just like, in order to redeem, Jesus must become. And so those born from a woman, like this is all of humankind. And so Gentiles, like everybody fits in that category. So Jesus is one of them. Born under the law means also those who are part of the Mosaic covenant. And so Jesus is also one of them. And so now, because he's a part of both of those communities, he has some sort of capacity to redeem them that he would not have had. Like it's showing that Jesus is equally kind of invested in those two groups of people. And other way of reading it, which I like less, but maybe what Paul is talking about, is that Jesus came into the world and was killed because of the Roman authority under the Jewish law. And we talked about that in the Passion stories of the gospel. And so what he's done is to expose the deathliness of both of those things, and that they are in fact not capable. If you read it that way, like it has some really harsh anti-Torah implications. So I tend to want to not read it that way, but I don't know. Does any of that stick with you positively or negatively or curiously?
I mean, it's hard for me not to read Paul as being pretty down on the systems by which Jews live. And, maybe it's because of the context of where his speech is here, and maybe it is a lot bigger than that. But yeah, I mean, if you are being redeemed from being under the law, like you are being saved from under the law, it sounds like a tree fell on you and someone's lifting up the tree. And, it's...
Yeah.
It sounds like you need saving from the law in some.
Yeah, I think that's a totally reasonable way to read it. And maybe that's the right way to read it. And if you read it that way, like I think the kind of what maybe Paul is saying then is that the law, the Torah, is one of these world systems that have been like maybe it's a different kind of world system. Maybe it's even the best of the world systems, but is at the end of the day, it is one of the world systems from which people need to be redeemed. That's probably what Paul's really after. I think I want Paul to be after something else, but there he is.
I mean, in some ways, I think you are, Paul is as challenging for you to read, or more challenging for you to read than me in some ways, because it's your scripture.
You're just like,
I mean, I don't want it to be saying bad things about my people, because that's not good for the Jews either. But,
It's fair. Yes, it is true. All right. So at the end of whatever has just happened, Jesus has redeemed from under the world systems. Now the people are adopted. So the Christians in Galatia he's talking to, and presumably then Christians more generally, are adopted, and they become sons and daughters. So the idea is these people, the Gentiles who were not considered sons and daughters of God before, now they have been adopted. Now they are sons and daughters. Into them comes the Spirit. So the Spirit of his Son. So now we're connected back to that Acts 2 text in a slightly different way, but we're back to Pentecost, like the rushing in or the giving of the Holy Spirit into people's hearts, which causes them to cry out, Abba, Father. The ordering of that to me is really interesting because it's not that people cry out to God and God gives them the Spirit. It's that God gives them the Spirit, which enables them to cry out. That now they recognize God as their parent.
No, I love that. And that fits so well with some of the other conversations we've had this season about the ways in which Peter in particular, but others also, see God moving within the Gentile people in ways that, like, this wasn't the plan. Like, you know, like this wasn't how we thought this was going to go, but it's clearly happening.
Yes.
So we can pretend it's not, but I
Yes.
don't think that's a good idea. And this is, the Spirit, when the Spirit comes into you, then you will recognize God and things change.
I like that way of thinking about it. As I like going back to that text about like how do we know that the Spirit is at work among Gentiles, and that whole conversation from Acts 15. Today we've seen it. When the Spirit comes upon you, you'll be able to speak languages that you don't know, which hasn't happened to me yet. But you'll be able to communicate to people in their own idiom.
Yes.
And then here and you will recognize that God is your parent. And then there's going to be some other manifestations of the Spirit in our next text. So picking up in 5:13, you are called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only don't let this freedom be an opportunity to indulge your selfish impulses, but serve each other through love. All the law has been fulfilled in a single statement: love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour each other, be careful that you don't get eaten up by each other. Okay, I'm just going to stop there. We'll talk about that a little bit, and then we can move on. You and I have one of the reasons I wanted to read this is you and I have talked fairly often about the problem of being set free from anything. Means like that now. Like, what do? Like, you just live out your impulses. You talk about that sometimes as like if you were set free from Pharaoh in Egypt, but you weren't. You just weren't set free. You were also given this other way of life to kind of govern you. Here, it's you're being set free from that way of life. You're being set free from the Torah and the world systems. And then Paul seems to be a little self-reflective about like, there's a real possibility that now people are just going to do whatever they want.
Yeah, freedom is confusing.
Yes.
And the way that I think about it, coming from the context of Pharaoh, is you are set free from Pharaoh in order to be a servant of God.
Yes.
And then Torah is the things that sort of like, help you stay in that line. So this, I guess I would imagine that he doesn't use this language, but that Paul would not disagree that like you're still would you say a servant of God? It's just that all the bumpers are gone from the bowling alley. Like,
right.
You're going to move with the Spirit and figure out how to do that.
Here it's interesting because it's not about God. Like, what he says next is serve each other through love. And so in the first instance, he's about, what about community? Which I really appreciate about him. Like, serve each other, and if you turn on each other, y'all are going to eat each other up. Like, that recognition that sometimes freedom just results in like total disruption of community.
Yeah.
And then and it's so interesting that even while he's saying we need to be set free from Torah, what he's doing is quoting Leviticus and saying, love your neighbor as yourself. Like, this is the way you're supposed to live. And that's what the whole Torah is trying to say.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons I think Paul is not actually trying to get rid of Torah. He's trying to sort of reorient people to a certain way of thinking about Torah, and also saying, if you come up in a tradition that doesn't know the Torah, that's okay. Because you can get there you can get to the same principle in other ways.
But like it's really quite a radical thing to say, you should become slaves to one another. Like, that's what I mean by freedom.
It is interesting that we've gone from being enslaved to the world systems and enslaved to the Torah to being enslaved to one another as siblings. That is a really interesting use of that word.
Yeah, no, and that we are enslaved, just the whole notion of being enslaved is so hierarchical. And this is like trying to take that level of commitment to someone else and level the field.
Yeah.
That's radical.
So what Paul has done just there is raise the question of okay, so if we're not beholden to the Torah anymore, but our selfish desires are going to make us chew each other up, then what do we do? And in some way, his answer to that is in this next section of text, starting in verse 16. I say, be guided by the Spirit, and you won't carry out your selfish desires. A person's selfish desires are set against the Spirit, and the Spirit is set against one's selfish desires. They are opposed to each other, so you shouldn't do whatever you want to do. But if you are being led by the Spirit, you aren't under the law. The actions that are produced by selfish motives are obvious, since they include sexual immorality, moral corruption, doing whatever feels good, idolatry, drug use and casting spells, hate, fighting, obsession, losing your temper, competitive opposition, conflict, selfishness, group rivalry, jealousy, drunkenness, partying, and other things like that. I warn you, as I have already warned you, that those who do these kinds of things won't inherit God's kingdom. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There is no law against things like this. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the self with its passions and its desires. If we live by the Spirit, let's follow the Spirit. Let's not become arrogant, make each other angry, or be jealous of each other. So Paul starts here with this sense of like conflict in the world between the Spirit given by God and a person's selfish desires. It's a very like tensive world that we live in. Mm-hmm. How do you relate to that? Does you think he's onto something there? Push back on him about that?
You know, I like the way that your translation has it, or the way that you just said it, that the tension is with selfish desires.
Selfish desires is the CEB. Is the NRSV just got the flesh?
The desires of the flesh.
Yeah.
And that was a rough dichotomy for me. But I think that the idea of selfish desires, if we're in what frankly sounds a little bit like a utopia to me, but that's what they're trying to build, so that's okay. Yeah. Where everyone is really committed to the other people, then that means other people are committed to you and are looking out for your best interests, so you don't have to be. Like, it's not that your needs shouldn't be met. It's that you shouldn't have to direct your attention that way, because as long as everyone is always looking out, the community will take care of itself, ultimately.
I like that. You're helping me think about this issue of like, what does selfish desire versus desire of the flesh?
Yeah.
One way of framing it that is helpful for me is to think of selfish desire, or the desires of the flesh, as being the desires that are inculcated in us by those world powers we were talking about earlier. The things that we are sort of led by the powers that be to value. And I mean, that may be a little bit anachronistic, but I'm just thinking about American culture and the degree to which American culture is all about, or at least the American culture that I exist in is all about like satisfying yourself and like looking out for yourself first and making sure you get what you want. And Paul is, I think, saying that the life of the Spirit is not that. The life of the Spirit is in contradistinction to that. And he's using the flesh or selfishness there a little bit about like what I myself want, but maybe equally as much or more so about like what is given to me by other sources of thinking about what should I value. That's not what we're doing. We're not looking out for ourselves first. And the Spirit is sort of guiding us in that way.
Yeah.
In verse 18, if you are being led by the Spirit, you aren't under the law. Do you have a thought about like what he's after there?
My best understanding of it, and it may be more nuanced than this, but is that, he's working on the problem that you have laid out. Like if what's being offered here is freedom, and we've taken off the sort of guardrails of Torah, he's offering instead, like he's offering a different sort of set of guideposts that are much more general. I don't know if general is right, like a short list here of things to avoid. because if you're following all the stuff in Torah, this stuff will be covered in there, just in a lot more specific examples. And he's saying that's not going to cover you if you're led by the Spirit. So you have to pay attention to these guardrails instead.
I think you are on the right path with that, and it will become clearer what he's actually saying later in the passage. Like, I'm just curious, like when you read this list, were there any that stuck out to you?
I thought it was interesting, the mix of things that were sort of like behaviors, what I would call behaviors, like sorcery, idolatry, maybe fornication, and then things like strife, jealousy, anger, envy.
That's where things started getting real for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it was interesting to try to think about, like, what is this? Yeah. Like, what's at the heart of this bucket? And I think a lot of what you just said sort of got to it for me, is trying to, if you're always thinking about the other people around you as the image of God, it doesn't mean you'll never feel anger or envy, but don't follow that road. Like, feel the feeling, but if you walk the path of envy or anger, it is going to sever your connections to the community. Like that is, and that's ultimately gonna, devour everything.
That is really well said, Amy. What you were saying reminds me a little bit of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. And he says, okay, the Torah says don't kill. I tell you, don't be angry. He takes the outward action and he says, here's the inner attitude that leads to that outer action. And so it's not just the outer action that you need to be careful about. It's the inner feeling. And that feels like an escalation to me. Like, I have
for sure
lived my life so far without murdering anyone, but like, I have probably been angry like 4 times today, maybe not that much, but you know what I mean? And so like for Paul's list kind of does the same thing. Like, okay, I can do that. I can do that. I can do that. Yeah. Oh, wait, jealousy? Like that happens to me, like selfishness, what, and so it kind of gets a little closer and closer and closer.
Yeah.
So in contrast to that, Paul then gives us this list of the fruits of the Spirit. I, as someone with 2 young Christian children, there's the song that you sing about the fruit of the Spirit's not a banana. And then you sing, because the fruit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Love, joy, peace, patience,
That's
kindness,
catchy.
goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. This morning, my son was wanting to sing that song. So I started singing. He's like, no, Dad, I want to sing it with doot, doot, doo. And so he was like really upset with me. And he just wanted to go doot, 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 doot.
This song is too wordy. Yeah, it is wordy. Yeah.
Anyway, first of all, just what do you think of that list of things?
It's much less specific. Like, these are sort of ways of being more than like, I mean, the other one, like, I don't know, drunkenness and fornication are like pretty specific actions, maybe being called out because they were happening. I don't know. But these are not specific actions. They're ways of being that would inform, I guess, all of your actions.
It's like what we were talking about before with the outward actions, and then they get to the inner attitudes. And now here we've just got a different set of inner attitudes that presumably will lead to different kinds of actions in the world. But you're right, he's not interested in the specific actions here. He's interested in that, like, how you feel, like who you are deep down. I really like this list. Like, I don't have anything very profound to say about it, I don't think. But like, I would love to be that person and to live in a world where that's what people are like.
Yeah, I mean, I have no complaints about this list. Assuming that we are reading it as like, these are the things to lean into. These are the things to try to feed and follow in your life. Like, you can't demand someone be joyful.
Be joyful!
I think it's it. I mean, unless it's talking about behavior. I mean, I guess it's a mix of behaviors and feelings in here.
Be gentle!
Don't be angry, though,
Oh,
Bobby.
yeah. I just have to be firm. Yeah. Firm but not angry. Yes.
I think it's a good list. I'm like just picking at it, but it's a good list.
No, I think you're exactly right. But you're also onto something important, which is you can't just like tell people, be gentle. And then suddenly they're like, oh, okay, I'll be gentle. And then they're always gentle,
Yeah.
Like it is.
You have to work on it.
You got to work on it. Here, so first of all, Paul drops in this line, there is no law against things like this, which relates to what you were saying earlier about there are laws against things like the other list, And so Paul really is working on this kind of idea about like, okay, the Torah tells you not to do these things, but you wouldn't do those things if you had the Spirit. And if you have the Spirit, you will do these things. And the Torah likes all of these things. So if you have the Spirit, you won't do those things. You won't do the bad things, and you will do the good things. So you don't actually need the Torah to diagnose that for you. This, I think, some scholars read this as Paul is kind of working on that idea in Jeremiah 31, which we read earlier this year, that God is going to give a new Torah, not a different Torah, but a Torah that is written on the heart. And here it's not written on the heart exactly, but it is the outgrowth of the Spirit within. Like this you are inhabited by the Spirit, which produces this fruit in you. And in the same way that Jeremiah says, we won't have to like constantly be reminding ourselves about it because we'll just be able to do it. That is really similar to what Paul seems to be saying here. It's not a new Torah given to you, but it's the Spirit given to you. And when you read this on Pentecost, which in the Jewish tradition is the giving of the Torah, and in the Christian tradition is the giving of the Spirit, then those two things are functioning in a similar way. Does that ring any true, untrue? Like, does that make sense?
I get it. It's like instead of the whole book with all the details, like I'm going to give you that. If you can get these certain lenses to see the world through, then you are going to be able to figure out how to behave in any particular situation. You don't need me to tell you how to behave in that situation, because if you get these general concepts, you can apply them. Like this is the like for all the critiques I would make of the modern educational system, that we teach kids like sort of you lose the forest for the trees. Like we teach them how to do all the individual things, but they don't really get the big picture, and so can't apply it in a different situation in a way that makes sense. That's how I sort of understand what you're saying here, is that if there's a way for you to get the big picture, then you'll be able to go out in the world and behave in godly ways without having to have that as spelled out for you in the Torah. Yeah.
I think that is exactly it, except for one final move that Paul makes in the next verse, which is those who belong to Christ have crucified the self, and we live by the Spirit. And so I think what Paul is saying is not exactly that you could learn all these laws, these rules, these attitudes, and then you could do them. It's actually that you can't, unless the Spirit is alive in you. Like the Spirit has come upon you. It has made you recognize God as Father, Abba Father, and it is then producing in you this kind of fruit. You're not doing it. You didn't figure it out. You didn't train yourself, but you have gotten yourself out of the way so that the Spirit can produce these things in you. This is the kind of, in my tradition, we would talk about this as like justification and sanctification, that like the coming upon you of the Holy Spirit is like the thing which initiates the relationship with God. And then the sanctifying is the like, you become sort of ever molded more closely to the way God wants you to live. but you couldn't do that by yourself. That it's the Spirit that works through you that produces these fruits. So functionally, from the outside, it would look the same, right? Like what you're saying is it would look like you learn all these rules and you know when to apply them. Paul is trying to say, no, actually, people aren't capable of that, but the Spirit is. And so when the Spirit is present, then this is what you will look like.
So is Paul saying, you don't have to try to do this stuff?
I think he is saying you cannot do this stuff by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that he says, let's follow the Spirit, let's not become angry. I don't think he thinks it's inevitable that you would live this way if you are part of the Spirit. You couldn't do it without the Spirit.
I see.
You can do it through the Spirit, but you could also slip back into not doing it. You could choose not to live by the Spirit, even though the Spirit had been given to you.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
It comes in and out of making sense.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah,
probably about what I can get to. It's such an interesting, I certainly understand the idea of within a religion wanting to sort of kind of take ego out of it and to the maximum extent possible, make yourself a vessel of God in the world, that God's love flows through the world through your body. And that's how it works. Yeah. I'll stop. Good.
Yeah. No, I'm with
Good
you.
talk, buddy.
I hear what your concern is about, you need some practices and guidelines and habits. You talk about your Torah practice a lot, and ways that I take on is the development of habits, habits of mind and habits of body, so that you don't so that you're in the practice of thinking and acting and believing and behaving in certain kinds of ways, so that it starts to come more naturally to you. And this is like that, except without the habit part, exactly in the same way. It's about the openness to the Spirit. Mm-hmm. And so you end up in kind of a similar place, but in a very different way. All right, Amy. Well, we have read 3 texts today, 1 from Acts, 2 from Galatians. It is Pentecost. It is the last regular episode of Bible Worm. What do you want to say?
No, man.
Sorry, it is the last regular episode of Bible Worm for this regular season. We will be here in the summer and also next year.
What's actually coming to my mind is something you said at the end of the very first little section we read from Acts, which is just the position that those folks are in, moving between disciple and apostle. And at least for me, how difficult it is to ever feel like you know enough to go out and teach, I don't know enough. I will never know enough to go out and teach. And yet if we don't, then the word doesn't, doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So I think what I would want to end with is just to bless us that our study for the year, though it feels incomplete, and it will always be incomplete, that it can be enough to know what the next thing is, enough to be able to go out into the world and teach something you learned this year to someone else, and then we'll see what happens next.
I love that, Amy. I like it will never be enough. It is always calling you back. I think that is exactly right. And yet, there is a calling out into the world that is to be done, even though we are partially prepared.
We're in process. What about you, Bobby?
We've been reading for the last couple of weeks various passages all the way back since Acts 15, where people say, we know that the Spirit is already at work among them. And the question is, how did you know that? And there were certain kinds of signs that the Spirit is at work. In Acts, it's speaking in tongues, which as a Presbyterian, we would not know a tongue if it bit us. That's not something I can relate to. In today's text, it's behaving in ways that are paying attention to the cultures of others, right? We're taking the message of the good news, but we're doing it in ways that people can receive from us without us putting the work on them to figure out what we're talking about. And I think that is important when we're thinking about what does it mean to be bearers of good news into the world. But I'm really taken with this last list of fruits of the Spirit, and to say, like, how do you know where the Spirit is at work? Well, the Spirit is at work in places where you see love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And for me, that works in two ways. One of them is paying attention to myself and to my own community and saying, what kind of fruit do people see me producing when they look at me? Mm-hmm. And if it's these things, then I think I'm close to being the way that I want to be as a person who's living out of the Spirit. And if it's not, if it's some of these other things about anger and fighting and all of these things, devouring others, like then it's a check. We got to check ourselves. Just because we think we have the Spirit, or just because we call ourselves Christian, doesn't mean we're actually living the life of the Spirit. And Paul says as much here. You've got the Spirit, so let's follow the Spirit. Let's don't do these other things that we used to do. And so I think Christian communities need to constantly be checking ourselves and seeing what kind of fruit we produce and comparing it to this list of things. The other thing, I don't know if Paul would follow here, but the other thing that this text opens up for me, and a little bit in that Acts passage that we read a few weeks ago, where Peter and Paul are saying, look, we see the Spirit at work in places where we didn't expect to see it, but there it is, like, there it is. And if you follow that line with this passage, then you start to say, like, maybe the Spirit is at work outside the boundaries of what we think is reasonable places for the Spirit to be. And then you start looking around the world and you start seeing people in communities that display these kinds of attitudes and ideas and behaviors. And you think, there's the Spirit of God at work over there. It may not be quite the same way as I understand the Spirit of God. It may be like, that's not the way they would think about it, but like, there's something here that connects us, even though we might talk about it differently. Maybe that's a heresy, probably that is, but I like to think about it like there are people who are living the Spirit life that I am also living, or trying to live, even though we don't talk about it or think about it the same. We're kind of in it together or we could be anyway, in an important way.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to try to place ourselves in this moment in history of these texts where there was this huge change happening. And I'm sure it was a heresy then too. I mean, heresy wasn't really a thing, but to say that must be the way that God is working in the world because I can see it. It didn't follow the rules. So it's a call to us not to follow them either. Heresy all around.
Amy, one of the things you said earlier about always being in the text, like always cycling back around, reminded me of a practice that you introduced in Bible Worm some years ago, maybe in the first season, of ending the narrative lectionary cycle by reading the beginning of the next narrative lectionary cycle, which we will not be into until August. But I really like that idea. It's Genesis 1, which we were talking about earlier. And so I'm just going to read the beginning of that text. This is the first part of the text that we'll start with next year. When God began to create the heavens and the earth was without shape or form. It was dark over the deep sea, and God's wind swept over the waters. God said, "Let there be light," and so light appeared. God saw how good the light was. God separated the light from the darkness. God named the light day and the darkness night. There was evening and there was morning, the first day. So the narrative lectionary will pick up there in September, and we'll be there, I guess, at the end of August sometime. In the meantime, you and I are going to spend the next 6 weeks in the book of Revelation, trying to unpack what that might have to say to us in this time and place.
It's going to be a wild ride.
It's going to be good. I think it's going to be good. Yeah. So everyone is welcome to join us in the Revelation series. I hope you will.
I hope you will.
Or we'll see you in August and September.
Yeah.
All right, Amy. Well, thanks for this episode, and thanks for another exciting season of Bible Worm.
Fun season of Bible Worm. Yeah. I'll see you next time.
See you then.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Bible Worm. If If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for details.
Bible Worm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible.
Next week, we begin our summer series on Revelation and Resistance with Revelation 1:1-20. Until then, keep on digging.